Hi, in this tutorial I'm going to walk you through curved areas and main toolbar in Cityscape Pro. So let's start. Let's go to Create Panel. Let's go to Helpers and go down to Symbolium and Cityscape Pro. Let's drag and drop. Okay, now we go to Modify menu. Okay, so in main panel we have the surface base object. Let's just create a plane. I think the plane is the easiest thing to do for surface. So let's do 100 meters by 100 meters. Okay, and one thing to know about surface object is that you don't really need any kind of topology. Just single polygon should do it. The less you have is better because Cityscape can handle topology by itself. If you have a flat site, I guess the plane would be the best object for surface, but if you have a terrain information, then you might need to use segments. So we'll go through that a little bit later. Okay, so the next thing that we need would be to pick the surface object, and if you notice, the generate result button started flashing. It does it every time it detects a change in the scene, every time a spline gets updated or any kind of feature is modified in the interface. It will start flashing. It means that it's time to generate, and it has detected a change, but we don't need to generate right now. We're not ready yet. Let's just pick everything first and let's generate afterwards. Okay, so then we have the curved areas. Curved area, let me just remind what it means. Let's just look at that intersection image again. Okay, so curved areas are the areas that are elevated from road surface by a certain height, and the ones that are surrounded by curbs. So let's just highlight those curved areas in blue. So these would be the curved areas in Cityscape, and everything else would be just road surface in this case. Okay, so with that information in mind, let's just go back to our Max screen and let's just start drawing just basic curved area. You typically get that information from client, like from CAD drawing or something like that, but in this case, let's just do a simple thing. Let's just draw. All the splines in Cityscape Pro should be closed. That's very important because if Cityscape detects a spline that is not closed, it will give you an error message and it will highlight which areas are not closed. So now we should attach it together because we have a limited amount of slots in Cityscape, so all the spline areas should be attached together. Okay, so let's add our curved area. Let's pick it. One thing I forgot is to round up those edges. Like that. Okay. So let's go back to Cityscape. So we have our surface, we have our curved area spline, and now we can generate. Let's just generate and see what we get. Okay. So you can see that it has generated a curved area geometry. If we go to wireframe, you can see the topology. So this is our curve, and right now it's default curve type, but we can change it to low poly. Let's try that. Let's regenerate. You can see it has way less faces. It just saves poly count. If you have a large scene, this will save some polygons. You can try round curves. Okay, this is round, and we have none. Like if you don't have any curves or you like to insert your own custom curves, that would be an option. Okay, so let's just go back to default curve type, generate again. And the next thing would be the height. The default height of the curved area is 14 centimeters, but we can change it up to 0.2 meters. Or we can go down to 0.01 meters, which is 1 centimeter, or 10 millimeters. Okay. Let's bring it back to 0.14, and you can see again that every time I change something, generate button starts flashing in blue, which means that change has been detected. Okay, so let's go to next feature, which is curb cut. In order to create curb cuts, we need to just specify the areas. curb cut areas. It doesn't have to be rectangular, it can be any kind of shape. It can be circular. You can specify multiple areas at once. Okay, and now we just have to attach everything together just to make one spline. Okay, Cityscape, big spline. Okay, the button has started flashing, and let's just generate and see what we get. Perfect. So this is our curb cut. You can see that it comes down gradually. It generated it on multiple areas like we specified. Okay. One important thing is to try to keep the splines organized. Like, it's very important to name splines properly, otherwise it might be very difficult to navigate through a scene. When there's a complex scene, it will be almost impossible to understand which spline is what. So it's a very good idea to name splines properly. So let's name it curb cut. And you can see that it's been updated in the interface. Let's just select curved area spline. By the way, that arrow allows you to highlight the spline in the scene. That arrow comes every spline button. It also comes in the list here and here, and it also comes with surface. So if you click it, it will just highlight the spline in the scene. So let's just name this spline curved area. Okay. So once you generate Cityscape object, you can just move this splines around, just update it or add more, change existing ones. You can see that the Cityscape will detect change because the spline has been modified. So once you generate, it will just create more areas and update others. Okay, now let's look at the surface again. Let's say we don't have flat side and we have some terrain information. Let's just increase the segments because that's the only way to get some terrain information in. Let's do 60 by, that's a little too much. Let's do maybe 30. Yes, 30 by 30. And let's now add some noise modifier. Once we add noise modifier, you just need to increase the set value. It's probably 20 meters maybe. And let's just increase the scale. It probably should be 600 maybe. No, 800. Let's bring this down to 10. Okay. So if suddenly you have a terrain information, it's not a problem at all. It usually happens at the end of the project from my experience. You almost finalize a visualization project and then client requests, oh, here's our terrain data. So yeah, in Cityscape, it's very easy to add that later. So once you modify the surface, it will detect surface has changed. The generate button will start flashing. So you can generate. Let's see what happens. So you can see that the curved area follows the shape of surface object. So it's very easy to update afterwards. Okay, so now what we're doing is that we have to add hardscape areas. So hardscape areas is different types of payments. So let's start, and first let's just add some basic sidewalk area. So it will look like that probably. Just again, you don't need to follow the curved area. You can step outside of it. As long as it's a closed spline, it doesn't really matter. You don't really have to follow that accurately, otherwise it's just probably a waste of time. It's easier just to draw it outside. Okay, so let's just call it sidewalk. And let's pick it to hardscape areas. Okay, sidewalk. Let's generate. Okay, and now you can see that that sidewalk has a different material ID, and you can insert different material here. So let's just keep adding more hardscape areas. This time let's just do a circle, and let's call it pavement 1. I probably didn't put the spline name in. Okay. So every time you update the spline name, it will automatically get updated in interface. So let's just generate. And you can see that the new material ID has been generated for that area. If you noticed, there are some numbers in this list. Like higher the number, the object sits on top of the previous one. So in this case, the circle has a higher number than the sidewalk. So if we change and if we move the sidewalk down, it will sit on top of the circle. It works like layers, but it's upside down. Okay, so let's just add more circles just to see better how it works. Okay, so let's just add this circle, and let's just add another circle as well and generate. Okay, so if we move this circle up and generate, it will go all the way down. And if we move that blue circle up and generate, again, it moves all the way down and the sidewalk sits on top of it. Okay. So again, if you want to highlight the spline in the scene, you can just click that button. It selects the spline. Or again, you can just navigate in the list and do the same thing for other splines. You can select your surface, highlight the surface in the scene, and you can also highlight your curved area object geometry. Now, the curved area geometry is a typical edit poly object, but I wouldn't recommend modifying it in edit poly mode, because even if you modify the object, next time you generate, all the changes will be lost. So in order to keep the non-destructive workflow, it's highly recommended to do all the changes through interface only. Okay, so now let's move to different type of situation, which is this scene. So you can see that it's a fairly large site model. So it consists of multiple hardscape areas. And let's just demonstrate. Let's just add terrain to the surface objects. Just a simple noise modifier. And let's just generate. Again, it's a very large model, so it just takes about 20 seconds to generate. So you can see that the new model just follows the surface. Okay. So the next thing would be to understand how surface works. The surface object is kind of like a guide for everything else in Cityscape. It defines all the other objects, and it's used as a base for all calculations. But also, it turns into roads. This is a curved area object, and that's a surface object. You can see that the exposed area of the surface object has turned into roads. Let's go back to the simple scene. Now we have the no curb spline. If you want to remove curb from a specific area, you can just create a new spline area. Just pick it. Curbs that's inside of that spline area will be removed. that just gives you additional level of control. Like if you like to insert a custom curb here, or if the curb is just colliding into building and you just need to clear it. It's just an option. Okay. So the next thing would be the refine area. Refine area is a tool that allows you to create a higher resolution area. If you have lots of hardscape areas with very high detailed splines, you might get some little bit of distortion. The splines might not get calculated properly if hardscape areas are overcrowded. So refine tool gives you ability to just subdivide the specific area and just add more detail to it. Go to pick spline, just pick that rectangle, and now you will see that that area will be subdivided. Okay? So that just creates much higher resolution mesh, and it will be way more accurate. If there are some accuracy issues with hardscape areas, refine tool will solve all the problems. If you like to select all splines in the scene, it's that button. It just selects all splines and you can isolate it just to quickly edit in isolated mode. Now we can go back to material library. So material library is a collection of high quality materials which comes in dry, wet, and winter options. We can isolate just dry materials or just wet materials, winter materials. The other categories, just types of materials that don't fit into any of those three categories. If you, let's say, if you just work on a dry scene, you can just turn those materials off because you don't need wet materials in dry scene typically. We have a thumbnail size. And if you noticed, we have a list of our items. This list is copied from this list. This list is duplicated from those elements. This list highlights all the objects in Cityscape that need materials. You can see our surface object. There's curbed area, curb, and then we have some hardscape areas that we applied here. So let's just start adding materials here. Let's just take the curbed area. It's typically grass. Just select the curbed area here and just add, just double click here. Okay, it's applied. Now let's go to curb. We have a curb material here. Just double click and it's applied to curb. Then we go to circle 01. I'm not really sure which one it is. I forgot to name them properly. So let's just give it red color. We go circle 2, it's green color. Pavement 01, let's just set this one. And sidewalk. That's the typical sidewalk material. And the surface object, which is our main object. Let's just give it a road material. Okay? So now, if we want to automatically add materials to those objects, let's say we just quickly want to get some result and it doesn't really matter because it's early stage of project. We have 3 templates here, template dry, template wet, and template winter. If you click, it asks you, do you want to override current Cityscape materials with a template? You click yes, and it just randomly loads those materials. Cityscape materials can be applied to other objects as well. For that, you can just create a box or something. It doesn't really matter what object it is. You go to any material you want to apply, and you can notice that when I change material selections, the name here is changing as well. So we go to that material, we pick that button and drag and drop into the object. So that's how the material can be applied to other objects, through that button. You can also drag and drop it to material editor. Okay, we have a library directory. Typically, it's in the C drive, and it's in program files, Sympolium, and library. But you can feel free to move it anywhere in the network or any custom location, as long as you keep the folder structure same. You can create your own material library and share it on network. Let's go back to Cityscape interface. We have our help button, which highlights the documentation webpage, forum webpage, and technical support email. Now we can discuss materials and mapping in Cityscape Pro. Again, let's just create the Cityscape helper in Sympolium, Cityscape Pro. That's good. This is our surface. Let's just pick it. Let's pick our curved area. We can generate first. Okay. So you can notice that the curved area, even though it's outside of the borders of surface, it's not stepping out of surface. So we can now pick the hardscape areas. This is red pavement. That's wood board. That can be dark pavement. And this one would be just sidewalk. Okay, let's generate now. Okay, again, we can move the hardscape areas up and down, and this will change the order. The higher number will be sitting on top of the other ones. Important thing to know is that the splines, every time you pick a spline in Cityscape Pro, Cityscape mapping modifier gets applied automatically. That's not a real-time modifier. It stores those parameters, and during the generation process, it applies those parameters. So let's say we want to rotate mapping on that circle by 45 degrees. We can just write 45 number here, and next time we generate, you will see that the mapping will be rotated by 45 degrees. We can also do tiling size. We can modify just 0.5. And you can see that the button started flashing because it detected a change. So you can see that now it's half the size, so it's actually bigger because it's 0.5 U, V, and W tiles. You can do that on other surfaces as well. For example, the curved area, which is the base surface for everything, we can rotate it by 45 degrees. And once you regenerate, you can see the mapping will be rotated. Now, when you create a cityscape first time, default materials get applied, which means that it's just a simple checker material. We can actually look at the material to see how it works. If we pick the material, it's going to be a multi-object material. It consists of 13 materials, and you can see that there are actual names here. So the names that you input in splines are visible in those lists, and then they get copied here as well. Just to make it easier to understand, you'll know that number 4, let's say, is number 4 here. It's material ID number 4, and it's called red pavement. If you start moving a list items up and down, you can see what's going to happen if you look at this materials here. When we move it up and down, the materials will change name. And once we generate, materials will actually switch positions. So we can have, I think, up to 13 hardscape areas, and this will fill the list. Okay. So if you noticed, the corners of the site is a little bit segmented. You can see the segmentation here, and we can fix that easily by just going into the curved area spline, and we can either increase the interpolation from 6 to maybe 12. That's one way to do that. You'll just regenerate again, and you'll see that it will be much smoother. Or the other way would be, which is a preferable way, to keep the interpolation as low as possible. And if you have an area that's visible in rendering and you just want to add more segments on that specific area, you can just divide it. That way you're not increasing poly count of the overall object and you're just concentrating on this small area. Generally, it's recommended to keep the vertices as low as possible. This will speed up calculations. If you're importing any splines or geometry from CAD, it should be cleaned up. The vertex count has to be reduced to as low as possible. The splines shouldn't have any kind of self-intersection. When I say self-intersection, let me just show an example. So in CAD models, you have things like that sometimes, which is not visible. So this might have a problem because it's just self-intersecting. So things like that has to be corrected. All the splines have to be closed. If the spline is open, let's just demonstrate that. Break, and let's see what happens. So it has notified you that curved area spline is not closed. And once you click OK, it will highlight that spline and it will put a dot here in the area that's not closed, which can be very useful just to quickly weld it. Okay. Now let's go back to materials. These materials can be modified. You can treat it like a regular material as long as the multi-sub-object material structure is not destroyed. You can go into individual material and apply whatever material you'd like to, or you can just go to your material library and apply materials directly from the Cityscape library, which is the easiest way. Even if the material doesn't match your exact parameters, you can just use it as a base and then just change it afterwards. So in sidewalk, we can just load sidewalk material. In woodboard, we actually have two woodboards here. Let's use this one. Dark pavement, it's this one. Red pavement, this one. And curb, this is a curb material. Right now I only have the dry materials. We can have wet and winter as well. There's the curved area, which can be grass. And the surface, the road material can be this road material. That road material has to be set up properly. We'll go through that afterwards. It's done through this road texture tool. But for now, if you just apply it to an object, it will just give you like a regular asphalt material. Okay. So now let's just do a very quick light setup. That's a V-ray. So we can just do very simple settings here and see what's our resolution. Let's do something like that. And let's just render and see what we're getting. So the first thing you notice is that there's something wrong with the road texture. And you're absolutely right. All materials required in Cityscape to have real-world mapping. When you generate an element, Cityscape automatically applies real-world mapping to it. But if it's a surface object, and if we don't use the Modify Surface tab, or we don't use the road texture tool, which automates the mapping process, then we need to apply UVW map texture and check the real-world map size. Okay, so now next time we render, it's a different story. So again, you can see that this part is rotated. Okay, if we go back to our materials, you can see that the presets that we loaded from the material libraries are here. And you can just go in and it's a regular material. In this case, it's a V-ray material, but it also works with Corona. So you can modify it if you want to.